Tag Heuer has made some great watches, or at least some interesting watches. One interesting line is the Formula 1 line of watches. The line ranges from entry-level watches which have quartz movements and very vibrant colorways, through to automatic watches that have some interesting characteristics and complications. Case in point, for example, and the watch I'm going to be talking about today, is the Calibre 7 GMT, which has an automatic movement, a GMT complication, and this Batman colorway with a blue and black bezel. Now this particular one is available for auction at the moment on Grailsy, and I'll link to that in the description below. But I'll also go through the watch and give you my thoughts about it. And if you've got any thoughts about it, well, let me know that in the comments below. So let's start with a bit of an unboxing, at least such as it is. Now the outer box of this watch is relatively standard cardboard. It's exactly what you would expect. The inner box is robust and is an ordinary Tag Heuer watch. It doesn't exactly have any quirks or features, but it's perfectly pleasant. You've got a black outside of it and a white leather type inside, with this watch cushion that the watch ultimately sits upon. It is replete with a Tag Heuer logo, but there isn't terribly much else to say about it. Similarly with the instruction manual. It's an ordinary Tag Heuer instruction manual, the warranty card sits at the back of it, and there's not very much to say about it. Most people are probably never actually going to look at the instruction manual, but it's there in case you want it. So let's move on to the watch itself. So let's focus on the case and the aesthetics to begin with. Now the watch is reasonably well done and it's quite solid. This one is in rather good condition. The case is mostly in brushed stainless steel and is 41mm in diameter, so it doesn't really attract fingerprints. The side of the case has more of a polished stainless steel look, which is a little bit odd, but nevertheless the overall case is nice enough. Now the case is supposedly water resistant up to 200 meters, although I suspect again that no one is actually going to really test this. So the watch case is nice enough. It's relatively standard for a Tag Heuer. It's reminiscent of the Aqua Racer, for example. Now the dial is black and it's unpatterned. It would be nice if Tag Heuer had some patterning on it, like in the Aqua Racer line, but again, it's perfectly nice enough. It would, like I said, be nice if they did more to the dial, but it works and it is coherent as a dial. The dial is legible, the markers are large enough to be usable. It has the Tag Heuer logo around the 12 o'clock area, and it has the Calibre 7 notification and the GMT notification at the 6 o'clock area. The date is easy to read and it's at the 3 o'clock area. The dial is reasonably well put together, it's not complicated, it's not too difficult to read. It's perfectly usable, which is probably what you want in a watch like this. The hands are also quite nice as well, they are perfectly functional, although the second hand is somewhat small and can sometimes be a little bit difficult to read in the dark. Now the bezel has a Batman colorway, that is, it's black and it's blue. Now similarly the GMT hand is in a matching blue color. Now I personally quite like the color scheme, I think it's interesting, I think it's appealing, but of course that's personal taste. Whether you like the black and blue color scheme, well that's really up to you, but I personally do like it. Now the bezel doesn't actually rotate, but again given this has a GMT complication, so has a second time zone, that isn't too much of a problem, because you need some point of reference for that second hand from which you can read the time. So it is reasonably to be expected given that it has that GMT function. The bezel remaining in place makes some sense and it's aesthetically nice enough. The back of the case is closed, it's a closed case back, it has the Tag Heuer logo, and it has some patterning that's kind of like a checkered patterning on it. Again, it's perfectly nice, but not particularly unusual. It's functional, it's pleasant, it feels comfortable enough to wear, the case back doesn't get in the way. But there isn't anything particularly unusual about the case back. The dial has perfectly legible lume so you can read it in the dark. However, the GMT hand is a little bit difficult to read, and the GMT utility might not really be there in the dark. So you can read it in the dark in a pinch, but probably it isn't that usable in the dark. But again, you can read the time at least. The bracelet is similarly brushed stainless steel with a standard Tag Heuer clasp. It's what you would expect. The bracelet feels comfortable enough, it's easy to wear, it doesn't really catch on your skin, it feels perfectly okay. It feels solid, it feels secure, it doesn't feel like it's going to fall off, but it also doesn't feel like it's going to really get in the way and be obstructive. Now the clasp on the buckle is signed with the Tag Heuer logo, but otherwise it's pretty standard. It's normal, it's easy to use, it's what you would expect. If you had a Tag Heuer watch before, it's kind of what you would get with a Tag Heuer watch. Now if we go into the movement, well, the movement has Tag Heuer's Calibre 7 movement. Now there's some mixed information about exactly what the Calibre 7 movement is, because it's variously reported as being based on an ETR or a Salita movement, depending on the execution of the watch. In either case, it's relatively robust, it's relatively easy to service given the ubiquity of the movement, and it is perfectly functional. Now this particular one, like I've said, has a GMT complication. The movement has somewhere between 42 and 46 hours of power reserve, and it has 28,800 beats per minute, which is what you would expect of a watch like this. Now adjusting the time is relatively standard. You unscrew the crown, it has a screw down crown as an example rather than just a pull out crown, which is what you would expect if it's got water resistance. So you unscrew the crown and then you can move the time like you would ordinarily do. The crown is textured so it's easy to use. Now adjusting the date in the GMT hand is a little bit more fiddly, because you need to set it to the crown to the other setting, and then you move one way to change the date and the other way to move the GMT hand. The annoying thing here, of course, is that if you go too far off the date, you need to cycle all the way back around, because you can't reduce the date. Similar with the GMT hand, if you go too far, you need to go through a whole other cycle, which can be a little bit annoying. Similarly, if you forget which way to turn it for the date or the GMT hand, you can end up having to do a whole cycle of the one you didn't intend to change because you changed the wrong thing. Nevertheless, it's easy to use once you get used to it, although it is a little bit fiddly. Changing the time, however, is of course straightforward, and like I've said, the crown is easy to use, it's textured, and is also signed with the Tag Heuer logo. It also has hacking, so when you pull it out, the second hand stops, which is something that you would like. So the movement itself is robust, it's usable, it functions like you would hope. I personally would like to be able to perhaps switch the date back and forth a little bit easier, but nevertheless, it functions for what it is. So that overall is the watch. I think the watch is a perfectly good option. I think it functions well. I think it looks attractive. It's relatively robust. It's easy to use, and it goes with most sporty type casual situations. Now, of course, there are other options. So for example, you could look at the Breitling Super Ocean range. Depending on the specification though, it might be a little bit more expensive. Or you could look at the Breitling Colt watches, although I personally prefer the Tag Heuer over the Breitling Colt, if only because I don't particularly like the bracelet on some of the Breitling Colt watches. Another alternative are some of the other Tag Heuer lines, like the Tag Heuer Aqua Racer, which has some similar aesthetics, although the dial is a little bit different. The Aqua Racer is sometimes more expensive than the Formula 1, but again, a lot of it varies based on condition, based on complications, and the like. So that would be another viable alternative for this. Also, you can look at other watches like Oris watches, for example. Oris tends to be a little bit cheaper than Tag Heuer, but again, a lot of it depends on condition and the exact watch. Now, I've got an Oris Diver 65 available for sale. I'll link to that in the description below if you're interested. So that's probably the most viable alternative to this particular Formula 1, but again, a lot of it depends on what exactly you're looking for with a watch and the aesthetics or the colorway that you're trying to go for. Now, like I've said, this particular Tag Heuer is currently available for sale. I'll link to the auction link in the description below so you can check that out. And when it sells, I'll link to some alternatives as well. But otherwise, that's a bit of an overview about the Tag Heuer Formula 1 GMT with the Calibre 7 movement. If you've got any thoughts about it, well, let me know that in the comments below. And otherwise, thanks a lot for tuning in, and hopefully I see you next time as well.